The eulogy. The chapel smelled of lilies and old wood, and something else, something like the air before a thunderstorm, pregnant with electricity and change. Rain streaked the stained glass windows, turning the saints into watercolor smears of crimson and cobalt. Isabel arrived first, 45 minutes early. She'd driven 3 hours after seeing the obituary online, though she couldn't explain why. The notice had been sparse. Memorial service, 2 p.m., Riverside Chapel, all welcome to celebrate a life well lived. No name, no dates. Just an invitation that felt personal somehow, like a letter addressed to her alone. She chose a pew near the middle, not too close to seem presumptuous, not too far back to appear disinterested. Her black dress was borrowed from her sister. She hadn't owned anything appropriate since her own mother's funeral 6 years ago, and after that she donated all her dark clothes, as if brightness alone could prevent future grief. The chapel was small, perhaps room for 60 people. Gothic Revival architecture, probably 1890s, with exposed wooden beams overhead and stone floors worn smooth by a century of footsteps. Isabel counted the empty pews and wondered how sad it must be to die with so few people to mourn you. 20 minutes before the service, a man entered, tall, black, maybe 60, with silver threading through his close-cropped hair. He wore an expensive suit that had seen better days, good quality but shiny at the elbows, the kind of thing a man holds on to because he remembers when he could afford it. Thomas. His name was Thomas, though Isabel wouldn't learn this until later. He stood at the entrance for a long moment, water dripping from his umbrella onto the stone, as if giving himself one last chance to leave. Then he moved to a pew on the opposite side from Isabel, near the back. He'd seen the same obituary. He'd been sitting in a public library, using their computer to apply for jobs he was overqualified for, and the notice had appeared in his peripheral vision. He'd stared at it for 10 minutes before writing down the address. Next came Chen, 15 minutes early, shaking rain from her short black hair. She was 28 but looked younger, with an artist's paint-stained hands and tired eyes. She'd been walking past the chapel when the bells began to toll, 3 deep, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate in her sternum. She'd stopped, looked up at the gray stone building, and found herself climbing the steps. She sat in the front row, left side. If anyone asked, she'd say she thought she should sit close since there were so few people. The truth was, she'd sat in the front row at her brother's funeral 5 years ago, and never forgiven herself for the times she hadn't been there when he was alive. Distance felt like betrayal now. Malcolm arrived exactly on time. Punctuality was reflexive for him. 30 years as an accountant had drilled it into his bones. He was 52, white, thinning hair, a face that had forgotten how to smile. He'd read about the service in the community bulletin board at his apartment complex. He'd been taking down a notice about his missing cat when he saw it. The cat had been gone for 3 weeks. Malcolm had stopped looking. He sat in the back right corner, the pew nearest the exit. Old habit. He'd learned to always know where the exits were after his divorce, when his ex-wife's family had surrounded him at his own daughter's wedding and made him feel like a stranger in his own life. The last to arrive was Priya, 5 minutes late, breathless. She was 34, Indian American, wearing a dark blue sari that had been her grandmother's. She'd been at the cafe next door, just fired from her teaching position. Budget cuts, they'd said, though she suspected it was because she'd advocated too loudly for her immigrant students. She'd ordered coffee to steady herself before going home to tell her husband they couldn't make next month's rent. Then she'd seen the small procession, the hearse, the flowers, the minister, and something had pulled her toward it. Maybe it was the loneliness of imagining a funeral with no mourners. Maybe it was wanting to be anywhere but in her own life for just 1 hour. She slipped into the back, left side, folding herself into the pew beside Thomas. She nodded apologetically. He nodded back. 5 strangers, 5 separate lives, 5 different reasons for sitting in a chapel on a Thursday afternoon to mourn someone they'd never met. The casket sat before the altar, closed. Dark mahogany, simple brass handles, no flowers on top, just a plain white cloth. No nameplate, no photograph, no indication of who lay inside. The minister appeared from a side door. She was neither young nor old, perhaps 50, perhaps 70, with white hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see through things. She wore traditional vestments, but moved with the fluidity of someone comfortable in her own skin. She approached the podium, opened a leather folder, and looked out at the 5 scattered mourners. For a moment, just a moment, her eyes met each of theirs in succession, and each felt a jolt of recognition they couldn't explain. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice rich and warm. "Thank you for bearing witness." The service began. "We gather to remember a life," the minister began. "Not a life of grand achievements or public acclaim, but a life lived in the margins, in the quiet spaces where we all make the choices that define us." Isabel folded her hands in her lap. Standard opening. She'd heard variations of this at dozens of funerals over the years. Her mother's, her uncle's, her college roommate who died too young. "Our friend understood something profound, that we are all connected, that every choice, every action, every word spoken or withheld creates ripples that travel farther than we can imagine, and that the moments we think are private, witnessed by no one, are often the moments that matter most." Chen shifted uncomfortably. There was something unsettling about the minister's tone, not unkind, but intensely present, as if she could see into the darkest corners of the room. "Let me tell you about our friend," the minister said. "Let me tell you about the moments that defined a life." She looked down at her notes, then up again. 9 months ago, on a Tuesday evening in March, our friend stood in a bathroom holding a pregnancy test. She was 42 years old, divorced, living in a 1-bedroom apartment she could barely afford. She'd been trying for a baby for 3 years, fertility treatments she'd paid for with credit cards, hope she'd rationed like medicine. Isabella's breath stopped. The test was positive, finally, impossibly positive, but she was alone, so alone, and the voice in her head whispered that she was too old, too broke, too broken, that she couldn't do this by herself, that it would be easier to make the call, schedule the appointment, go back to her simple, manageable life of loneliness. The room felt airless. Isabel's hands gripped the pew until her knuckles went white. "She stood there for an hour," the minister said quietly, "holding that test, holding her future. And then she made a choice. She put her hand on her belly and said out loud to the empty room, 'I choose you. I choose us. Whatever comes, I choose love.'" Isabel couldn't breathe. March, Tuesday evening, the blue bathroom tiles, the test she'd taken 7 times to be sure, the hour of paralysis, the words she'd spoken to no one, that no one could have heard. Her daughter was 4 months old now, sleeping in her grandmother's arms while Isabel attended this impossible funeral. "Our friend," the minister continued, "taught us that courage looks like choosing life when every rational thought says no, that sometimes the most important witness to our lives is ourselves." Thomas leaned forward slightly. Something cold was spreading through his chest. 14 months ago, the minister said, our friend walked past a man living on the street. Not an unusual sight in the city. We've all learned to look past these people, haven't we? To protect ourselves from their need, their humanity, their uncomfortable presence. Thomas closed his eyes. But our friend stopped, turned around, went back. It was winter, cold enough to see your breath. The man had a cardboard sign that said veteran and eyes that had stopped expecting kindness decades ago. Our friend didn't offer money. Instead, he sat down on the freezing concrete beside this man, ruined his expensive suit, the one he'd bought back when he had a corner office and a 6-figure salary, and he asked a question. "What's your name?" Thomas felt tears burning behind his eyelids. The man said his name was Robert. Robert who'd served in Afghanistan. Robert who had a son in Colorado who wouldn't return his calls. Robert who'd been invisible for so long he'd started to believe he was a ghost. Our friend sat there for 2 hours, listened to stories about a boy who loved baseball, a marriage that couldn't survive PTSD, choices that led to a bridge and then under it. Our friend didn't try to fix anything, didn't offer platitudes or solutions, just sat in the cold and listened, really listened. The minister paused, her eyes finding Thomas in the back pew. Robert died 7 months later, but his sister tracked down our friend to say that Robert had spoken about him in those final months, that after years of silence, Robert had reconnected with his son, that he died in a shelter bed instead of alone in the cold, that being seen by one person had reminded him he was still human. Thomas's face was wet. He didn't remember Robert's sister contacting him, but he remembered Robert, remembered the cold, remembered the way the man's eyes had cleared when someone finally asked his name. Chen was barely breathing. Something was happening here, something impossible. 3 years ago, the minister said, our friend stood in a hospital room at 2 in the morning. Her grandmother was dying, lung cancer, final stage. The morphine had taken away pain, but also speech, recognition, everything that made her grandmother herself. Chen's hands moved to her throat. Our friend had flown across the country to be there. Her grandmother had raised her after her parents died, had taught her to paint, to see beauty in small things, to survive in a world that often felt hostile. They'd been everything to each other. The nurses said it would be hours, maybe a day. Our friend's grandmother was unconscious, breath rattling in her chest, and our friend, who hadn't sung in public since she was a child, began to sing. Chen felt the room tilting. A lullaby in Mandarin, 月亮代表我的心, the moon represents my heart, the same song her grandmother had sung to her every night for 15 years, the song that meant safety and love and home. She sang it 3 times, and on the 3rd time, her grandmother's eyes opened, clear, present, fully there for one final moment. She smiled, squeezed her granddaughter's hand, and let go. Chen was shaking. The hospital room, the terrible sound of her grandmother's breathing, the song she'd sung because she didn't know what else to do, the moment of recognition before the end. No one knew about that. She'd told her friends her grandmother had been unconscious when she died. She'd never mentioned the singing, the smile, the perfect goodbye she'd been granted. Malcolm sat rigid in his pew. A terrible certainty was building in his chest. 7 weeks ago, the minister said, our friend came home from work to find his teenage son in the garage, the family garage. The door from the house was open, and his son was standing on a stepladder with a rope around his neck. Malcolm's vision tunneled.
The minister's expression was gentle, knowing. Private, or merely unwitnessed by other humans. What does that mean? Chen asked, her artist's mind trying to sketch logic onto the impossible. The minister stepped down from the podium, moving closer to them. You 5 were chosen to be here today, not randomly, not accidentally. You were invited because you each needed to know something essential about your lives. Chosen by who? Thomas asked, his lawyer's training kicking in even through the shock. Who's in that casket? Who knows these things about us? The minister looked at the closed casket for a long moment. Would you like to see? 5 pairs of eyes followed her gaze. 5 heads shook simultaneously. I don't think I do, Malcolm said quietly. I'm not sure I can handle any more impossibility today. Fair enough, the minister said. She pulled a chair from the side and sat facing them, as if this were a circle of friends rather than a funeral service. Let me tell you a story then, a different story. She settled into the chair, and somehow her presence made the Gothic chapel feel intimate, warm. "There's an old idea," she began, "that every life is a story being written, not by us alone, but in collaboration with something larger. Some call it God, some call it the universe, some call it consciousness or connection or love. The name doesn't matter as much as the understanding." "Which is?" Priya asked. She'd leaned forward, her earlier terror transforming into fierce curiosity. "That nothing we do is truly private. Every choice, every action, every thought sends ripples through the fabric of reality. We're all connected, not metaphorically, but literally, physically, quantumly connected. What you do in secret affects people you'll never meet. The kindness you show when no one is watching changes the world." "That's terrifying," Isabel said. "That's liberating," the minister countered, "because it means you matter. Always. Even when you think you're alone. Especially when you think you're alone." Chen wiped her eyes with the back of her paint-stained hand. "So this is what? Some kind of spiritual intervention? A reminder to be good little humans?" "Not quite," the minister said with a slight smile. "This is a mirror. A chance to see yourselves as you actually are, not as you fear you are." She stood and walked to the casket, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Each of you came here today carrying shame or doubt or the weight of feeling unseen. Isabel, you've been terrified you made the wrong choice, that you're failing your daughter because you struggle every day." Isabel flinched, but didn't deny it. "Thomas, you've believed since losing your career that you're worthless, that your dignity died with your job title." Thomas looked away. "Chen, you've been convinced since your grandmother died that you're alone in the world, that no one truly sees you or your art." Chen's jaw tightened. "Malcolm, you've thought of yourself as a failure ever since your divorce, a man who couldn't even keep his own son from wanting to die." Malcolm's hands clenched into fists. "And Priya, you've been carrying the belief that you're not strong enough to matter, that your passion for justice is just naivety that the world will crush." Priya's face hardened. "You don't know us." "Don't I?" the minister asked gently. "I know the stories you tell yourselves in the dark, the narratives of unworthiness and failure that loop through your minds like prayers to gods of self-doubt." She turned back to them, and her eyes were fierce now, blazing. "But I also know the truth. I know that Isabel is raising her daughter with more love than she ever received. I know that Thomas's act of kindness saved a life and restored a family. I know that Chen gave her grandmother the gift of a peaceful death. I know that Malcolm saved his son by simply being present. And I know that Priya's moment of grace may have changed the trajectory of a young woman's entire life."
You each think your moment was small, but there are no small moments. There is only the accumulation of choices that defines a life. Thomas cleared his throat. "You still haven't answered the question. Who's in the casket?" The minister was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Who do you think?" "A prophet," Chen said immediately. "Someone who could see our lives." "An angel," Isabel whispered. "Or something like it." "A con artist with an elaborate surveillance system," Malcolm said, his skepticism a shield against the wonder trying to break through. Priya stood up, taking a step toward the casket. "I think it's empty. I think this is a metaphor, a teaching." Thomas shook his head. "No, I think it's us, all of us. Some version of who we might have been if we'd chosen differently in those moments." The minister smiled. "You're all correct, and you're all wrong. The truth is simpler and stranger than any of those explanations." She moved to the casket and placed both hands on its surface. "What lies here is the death of the old stories you told about yourselves, the false narratives, the lies about your worthlessness, your failures, your isolation. Those stories needed to die so new ones could be born." "So this is a metaphor," Malcolm said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "No," the minister said firmly, "it's a funeral.
Real funerals mourn real deaths. The person you were before your moment of choice, that person is gone, dead, and you can never get them back. She looked at each of them in turn. Isabel, the woman who believed she was too broken to be a mother, she died when you chose your daughter. Thomas, the man who defined himself by his salary and title, he died when you sat on cold concrete and asked a stranger his name. Chen, the girl who thought her grandmother took her identity with her, she died when you sang a song of love into death. Malcolm, the father who believed he'd lost his son, he died when you chose to stay instead of fix. And Priya, the woman who thought kindness was weakness, she died the moment you smiled at a struggling barista. "So who are we now?" Isabel asked, her voice barely audible. "That," the minister said, "is what you'll spend the rest of your lives discovering." The minister returned to her chair, and the 5 strangers found themselves shifting in their pews, turning to face each other more fully. The invisible walls between them had dissolved. "I have a question," Chen said, and her voice was steadier now. "Why did you bring us together? Why not tell each of us separately?" "Because you need each other," the minister said simply. "You each walked in here feeling alone. You'll walk out knowing you're not." Thomas turned to look at Isabel. "You have a 4-month-old daughter?" Isabel nodded, surprised by the direct question. "Sophia, she's perfect and terrifying. I have no idea what I'm doing most days." "No one does," Thomas said, and his voice carried decades of life in it. "I have 3 kids. They're adults now, scattered across the country, and I still don't know what I'm doing, but they turned out okay anyway." "You have kids?" Isabel said, something in her chest loosening. "But the obituary made you sound alone." "The moment in my life was alone," Thomas clarified. "But my life isn't just that moment. I lost my career, yeah, lost a lot of things, but not everything." He paused. "Not the things that actually matter, I guess." Malcolm spoke up, his voice rough from disuse. "My son, Jamie, he's doing better. Therapy twice a week. We talk more now than we did before that day. It's strange. The worst moment of my life might have saved our relationship. Do you regret it, the moments that brought you here?" Malcolm considered this. "I regret that my son was in so much pain, but sitting in that garage, staying? No, I don't regret that. It's maybe the only thing I did right in years of doing things wrong."
Chen had been quiet, processing. Now she looked at the minister. "My grandmother. When she died, I thought I'd lost the only person who really understood me." "And now?" the minister prompted. "Now I don't know. Maybe understanding isn't something one person gives you. Maybe it's something you find in moments, in connection." She looked at the others. "I've been painting alone in my apartment for 3 years, barely talking to anyone, convincing myself it didn't matter because no one sees my work anyway. But maybe that's not the point." "What is the point?" Isabel asked. Chen smiled slightly. "I'm still figuring that out, but I think it has something to do with the fact that someone saw me sing to my grandmother. Someone witnessed it, which means maybe everything we do is witnessed, recorded somehow in the fabric of things." "That's still terrifying," Isabel said, but she was smiling now too. Priya had been watching this exchange, something shifting in her chest. "I was so angry this morning, about losing my job, about the world being unfair, about all these systems that crush people who are already struggling." She looked at her hands. "I'm still angry, but maybe being angry doesn't mean being cruel. Maybe you can fight for justice and still be kind to a barista having a bad day." "Both things can be true," the minister said. "You can rage against injustice and still offer grace to individuals. In fact, one without the other is incomplete." Thomas leaned back, a weight he'd been carrying for months, suddenly lighter. "When I lost my job, I thought I lost my identity. Like without the title, the office, the salary, I wasn't anyone. Just another invisible man." "And then you sat with Robert," the minister said. And then I sat with Robert, Thomas echoed. And he was invisible, actually invisible. And I realized that being seen isn't about what you do for a living or how much money you make. It's about, I don't know, recognition, witness, someone acknowledging you're human. We're all just trying to be seen, Chen said softly. All of us, even when we pretend we don't care. The rain had started again, a gentle percussion against the stained glass. The saints in the windows seemed to glow in the dim light. Isabel stood up, moved to a different pew, closer to the others. "Can I ask you all something?" 4 heads nodded. "Do you believe this is real? That this actually happened? Because the rational part of my brain is screaming that this is impossible, that there's no way anyone could have known about these moments. But you know it's true anyway," Malcolm finished. "Yeah, I feel the same way. My accountant brain wants to find the logical explanation, the surveillance cameras, the hired investigators, the elaborate hoax. But when I was alone in that garage with my son, there were no cameras, no witnesses." "Except there was a witness," Priya said, gesturing to the casket. "That's what this whole thing is about, right? The idea that we're never truly alone, that something is always watching, recording, remembering." "Does it bother you?" Chen asked. "The idea of being constantly observed?" Priya thought about this. "I think it should. I think I should feel violated. But actually—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Actually, I feel relieved. Like all the times I thought no one cared, no one saw, no one noticed. I was wrong. Someone was keeping track. Someone saw that I tried." "Even when we failed," Thomas added. "Even when we were just muddling through." The minister had been quiet, letting them process, connect, build bridges between their isolated experiences. Now she stood. "I need to tell you something else, about why you're here, about what comes next." 5 faces turned to her, open now in a way they hadn't been at the beginning of the service. "You were each chosen for this experience because you're at a crossroads, a moment of decision about who you'll become now that your old selves have died. And you have a choice to make." "What choice?" Isabel asked.
"Whether to remember this," the minister said. "Whether to carry this knowledge forward into your lives, or to let it fade like a dream upon waking." "Why wouldn't we want to remember?" Chen asked, alarmed. "Because remembering means responsibility. It means you can never again pretend that your private moments don't matter, that you can't hide behind anonymity or invisibility. It means living with the constant awareness that you're being witnessed, that your choices ripple outward, that you matter whether you want to or not." The chapel fell silent. "Some people," the minister continued, "find that burden too heavy. They choose to forget, to go back to their lives believing they're alone with their choices, that what they do in secret stays secret. It's easier, simpler." "But we'd forget this?" Malcolm asked. "Forget meeting each other? Forget everything that was said here?" "You'd remember attending a funeral," the minister said, "a small, unremarkable service for a stranger. You'd remember feeling moved, perhaps, but not why. The specific details would fade. The impossible knowledge would slip away like water through your fingers. And within a week, you'd convince yourself it was just a strange dream, nothing more." "And if we choose to remember?" Priya asked. "Then you'll carry this truth with you, all of it, the impossibility and the responsibility. You'll know always that you're witnessed, that your life is being recorded in some cosmic ledger, that every choice matters." "How do we choose?" Thomas asked. The minister smiled. "You already have. The moment you started connecting with each other instead of running from this experience, you chose. The people who forget are the ones who never open up, who stay locked in their own shock and fear, who leave the chapel without speaking to anyone else." She gestured to them, sitting closer together now, walls down, faces open. "You've already remembered. You can't unknow what you know now." Isabel felt something like joy mixed with terror. "So what do we do? How do we live with this?" "The same way you've been living, but awake now, conscious.
You make choices knowing they matter. You love knowing you're witnessed. You fail knowing failure is part of the story, not the end of it. And each other? Chen asked, looking around at the 4 other faces. Do we just go back to being strangers? That's up to you, the minister said, but I'd suggest exchanging phone numbers. You'll need people who understand, who've experienced the same impossible thing, who can remind you it was real when the rational world tries to convince you otherwise. There was a rustling as 5 people reached for phones, a moment of awkward laughter as they realized they were about to exchange numbers at a funeral. This is weird, right? Isabel said, smiling through tears. This is objectively very weird. Objectively insane, Malcolm agreed, but he was smiling too. They stood in a rough circle, entering each other's information, and the minister watched with an expression of deep satisfaction. One more thing, she said, and they looked up. The person in the casket you never asked to see. Do we need to? Thomas asked. No, but I'll tell you anyway. It's a mirror. A mirror? Priya said. Yes, just a mirror. Because what died here today was the false reflection you each carried of yourselves, the distorted image that told you that you were worthless, alone, failing, unseen. That version is dead, and when you look in a mirror now, you'll see yourselves as you actually are, as you've always been, as you were witnessed to be. She walked to the casket and placed her hand on it one final time. You can open it if you'd like. See for yourselves. But I warn you, what you'll see is your own reflection, and you might not recognize yourself anymore. No one moved to open it. I think I'd rather keep the mystery, Priya said quietly. Hold on to the impossibility. The others nodded in agreement.
Then our work here is done, the minister said. She glanced at the windows, where the rain had stopped and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. You should go. Get coffee or dinner. Sit somewhere warm and talk about normal things. Let this settle into your bones. Will we see you again? Isabel asked. Oh, I'm sure you will, the minister said cryptically. I tend to show up when people need reminding that they're witnessed, that they matter, that their stories are being written with care and attention. She walked back toward the side door from which she'd entered, then paused and turned back. One final thing. The moments I described today, those weren't the only ones. You've each had hundreds of moments of courage, kindness, love, thousands. This was just a reminder. You're not defined by one choice. You're defined by the accumulation of all your choices, the pattern they make, the story they tell. And what story do we tell? Chen asked. A good one, the minister said simply. A true one, a human one, with flaws and failures and also beauty and grace and love, the kind of story worth witnessing. Then she was gone, and they were alone with the closed casket and each other and the impossible memory of the last hour. They ended up at a diner 6 blocks from the chapel. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like optimism and regret in equal measure. They squeezed into a booth meant for 4, with Chen pulling up a chair from another table. For the first 10 minutes, no one talked about the funeral. They talked about the weather, finally clearing, about the diner's questionable decor. Thomas counted 17 different patterns between the wallpaper, floor tiles, and upholstery, about the fact that none of them had eaten lunch. They ordered. Isabel got pancakes, even though it was dinner time. Malcolm got coffee and pie. Chen ordered breakfast for dinner, eggs and toast and bacon. Thomas got a burger. Priya got soup and bread, comfort food that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. Then the food arrived and the small talk ran out, and they were left with the enormous thing sitting in the middle of the table between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. So, Chen said finally, poking at her eggs, that happened. Did it though? Malcolm asked, but there was no real doubt in his voice, just the automatic skepticism of a man trained to trust spreadsheets over miracles. It did, Isabel said firmly.
She cut into her pancakes with more force than necessary. I know what I heard, what we all heard. There's no rational explanation for how she could have known those things. I keep trying to find one, Thomas admitted. He'd barely touched his burger. I've been running through scenarios in my head. Hidden cameras, hacked phones, some kind of elaborate investigation. But none of it makes sense. The logistics alone would be impossible. Plus, Priya added, dipping bread into her soup, comfort food that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen. What would be the point? We're not rich, we're not famous, we're just people. Why would anyone go to that much trouble? To teach us something, Chen said. She'd given up on eating and was now sketching on a napkin, abstract lines that somehow captured the feeling of the chapel, the weight of the casket, the impossible geometry of the afternoon. Mission accomplished, Malcolm said dryly. He took a sip of coffee and grimaced. This is terrible coffee. The worst, Isabel agreed, smiling slightly, but somehow perfect. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the diner filling the space, the hiss of the grill, a baby crying 2 booths over, a teenager's laugh, the clink of silverware on ceramic. Normal life, the world turning as it always had while they sat changed at its center.
Chen smiled, and it transformed her face. I've been so focused on whether anyone sees my work that I forgot I'm the first one who sees it. I'm my own witness. We're all our own witnesses, Priya said. That's what the minister meant, I think, about the casket being a mirror. We have to see ourselves, really see ourselves. Not the stories we tell about ourselves, but the truth underneath. And what's the truth underneath? Malcolm asked. Priya thought about this, stirring her soup absently. That we're trying, that we're flawed and scared and confused, but we're trying. And sometimes, in our best moments, we choose love over fear, connection over isolation, presence over escape. I'm terrified I'm failing my daughter, Isabel said suddenly. The words burst out of her like they'd been dammed up for months. Every single day, she cries and I don't know why. She won't sleep and I'm so tired I hallucinate. I feed her and change her and hold her, and still I feel like I'm doing it wrong, like I'm breaking her somehow by being broken myself. She looked around the table, eyes desperate. Tell me it gets easier. Please tell me it gets easier. Thomas reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It gets different, not easier, just different. You figure out her rhythms, she figures out yours, and one day you'll realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're actually living, you and her together. My kids are in their 20s now, and I still worry I'm failing them, that I didn't do enough, didn't say enough, didn't see them clearly enough. Parenting doesn't come with a manual. You just do your best and hope it's enough. Is it? Isabel asked. Enough? Thomas smiled. They're alive. They're okay. They call me sometimes, and we talk about real things. So yeah, I think maybe it was enough after all. Malcolm cleared his throat. After Jamie came down from the ladder, after we found him a therapist and started the work of healing, I asked him why. Why that day? Why the rope? You know what he said? They waited. He said he felt invisible. Said he'd been screaming for help in his head for months, but couldn't figure out how to make the words come out. Said he thought if he disappeared, at least people would finally see that he'd been there. Malcolm's voice cracked. My son felt invisible in his own home, in his own life, and I hadn't seen it because I was too busy being invisible to myself, too busy believing that losing my marriage and my career made me disappear. But you saw him, Priya said gently. When it mattered most, you saw him. Almost too late, Malcolm said. But not too late, Priya insisted. That's the point. You were there in time. You made the choice in time. And now you're both learning how to see each other, how to be visible together. Chen had been sketching on another napkin, this time 5 figures sitting around the table. Do you think we'll stay in touch after today? The question hung in the air. They all had each other's numbers, but having someone's number and actually calling them were different things. I'd like to, Isabel said. I don't have a lot of friends. Single mom, new to the city, no time for a social life.
but I think I need people who understand, who know what happened today, who won't think I'm crazy." "We're all crazy, but at least we're crazy together," Thomas said. "I propose a rule," Priya announced. She'd straightened up, her teacher voice coming through. "We meet once a month, here at this terrible diner with its terrible coffee. We check in, we remind each other that we're witnessed, that we matter." "Like a support group?" Malcolm asked. "Like a family," Priya corrected. "A chosen family. The universe or God or whatever brought us together for a reason. Let's honor that." "I'm in," Chen said immediately. "Me too," Isabel added. Thomas and Malcolm exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "First Thursday of every month, 6 p.m. No excuses unless someone's literally dying."
"Deal," they said, almost in unison, and then laughed at the synchronicity of it. The waitress came by with more terrible coffee and the check. They argued over who would pay until Thomas pulled rank. "I'm the oldest, I'm paying." End of discussion. And they let him have this small dignity. Outside, the evening had turned cool and clear. The storm had washed everything clean, and the city lights reflected in puddles like fallen stars. They stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, 5 people who'd been strangers this morning and now felt like something more than friends, something deeper, bound by the impossible. "So," Chen said, "same time next month?" "Same time," they echoed. Isabel hugged each of them, fierce, quick embraces that spoke of gratitude and fear and hope tangled together. Priya kissed cheeks in the style of her grandmother. Thomas shook hands formally, but his grip was warm. Malcolm clapped shoulders, suddenly comfortable with touch in a way he hadn't been in years. Chen, the youngest, hung back until the end, then surprised herself by initiating a group hug that somehow all 5 of them fell into. "Thank you," she whispered into the tangle of arms and coats and different heartbeats, "for being real, for not running away." "Where would we run to?" Malcolm asked, and his voice was lighter than it had been in the chapel. "We've been seen. We can't hide anymore." "Don't want to hide. Not anymore." They broke apart, and there was nothing left to say. They'd said it all, or perhaps they'd said nothing, and everything would come later, in monthly dinners and phone calls and text messages in the middle of the night when the weight of being witnessed felt too heavy to carry alone. Isabel watched them walk away in different directions, Thomas to the bus stop, Malcolm to his car, Chen toward the train, Priya on foot toward her apartment. She stood alone on the sidewalk and felt, for the first time in months, not alone at all. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. "How's Sophia?" Isabel typed back, "Perfect. We're both perfect. See you tomorrow." She walked to her own car, drove home through the clean-washed streets, and climbed the stairs to her apartment, where her daughter was sleeping in her grandmother's arms. "How was it?" her sister whispered. "Strange," Isabel said, lifting Sophia carefully, feeling the warm weight of her, the reality of her. "Try," her sister said. So Isabel did, and as she talked, as she tried to put words to the afternoon's impossibility, Sophia woke up and looked at her mother with clear, present eyes, and Isabel looked back. And somewhere, somehow, in whatever cosmic accounting system kept track of these things, that moment was witnessed, was recorded, was counted among the infinite small moments of love that hold the world together. 6 months later, Chen's painting sold, not to a collector or a gallery, but to a young woman who'd lost her own grandmother and saw in the blue and gray and gold something that spoke to her grief. The woman hung it in her living room, and when people asked about it, she told them about loss and love and the songs we sing when words aren't enough. Thomas found a job. Not the corner office, not the 6-figure salary, but honest work with a non-profit helping veterans navigate social services. He thought about Robert every day, wondered if Robert's son in Colorado ever thought about the stranger who'd sat with his father in the cold. Malcolm and Jamie went to therapy together now, father and son, learning the language of feelings they'd both been raised to suppress. It was hard, awkward, but every week they showed up,
and that showing up was its own kind of miracle. Priya started a tutoring program out of her apartment, unauthorized, unpaid, teaching immigrant kids who'd fallen through the cracks. She was still angry about the injustice of the system, but now she channeled that anger into action, into presence, into being the teacher her students needed.
And Isabel was tired, always tired, but her daughter was growing, smiling, reaching for the world with fearless hands. And on the hard days, the impossible days, Isabel remembered 5 strangers in a chapel, remembered that she was witnessed, that she mattered, that love was a choice she made every morning when Sophia woke her up at dawn. They met at the diner on the first Thursday of every month. Sometimes they talked about the funeral. More often, they talked about ordinary things, jobs and kids and art, and the daily work of being human. They watched each other's lives unfold in real time, witnessed each other's struggles and victories. And once, only once, they went back to the chapel. It was a year after the funeral. They'd planned it, wanting to see if the place held up to memory, if the magic had been real or just adrenaline and shock. The chapel was locked, boarded up. A sign on the door said it had been condemned, structural problems, foundation issues, scheduled for demolition. "But we were here," Chen said, touching the rough wood of the boards. "This was real." "Maybe it was only real for us," Priya suggested. "Maybe the chapel existed just long enough to bring us together." They stood on the steps where they'd first connected, looking at the building that shouldn't have been safe to occupy, that probably hadn't been safe, that had held them anyway for the hour they needed. "Does it matter?" Thomas asked. "Whether it was a real place or a metaphor or something in between? We're here. We're real. What happened to us changed us." "It matters," Malcolm said firmly, "because I need to know I'm not crazy, that we didn't hallucinate all of this." Isabel pulled out her phone, pulled up a photo from that first dinner. 5 faces around a diner table, smiling uncertainly, still shocked, still adjusting to their new reality. "We're not crazy," she said. "We're witnessed. There's a difference." The chapel was demolished 3 months later. None of them went to watch. They didn't need to. The building had served its purpose. The funeral had happened. The old selves had died. The new ones were still learning how to live. And somewhere, in the fabric of the universe, in the quantum entanglement of all things, in the great cosmic accounting of moments that matter, 5 private choices were recorded, were remembered, were counted among the infinite acts of courage and kindness that write the story we're all telling together. The story with no name on the casket, because it's all of our names. The story that's still being written. The story that's witnessed. Always. The end.